Hey guys, this is Luke Johnson from the Noetic philosophy teaching app. Something that we try to do at Noetic is to bring people into the community who have a philosophical background. And today I'll be working with Lyman. And we're going to be talking about the intersection of pedagogy and philosophy. And you'll be able to find this on the Noetic app, the Noetic podcast, and SoundCloud, and all of that, and here on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe and donate so we can make more programming like this. So, Hunt, I have nothing prepared. I was just saying off camera that I've been working on the seminars for Simone de Beauvoir and Roland Barthes, and I think I would just kind of let you take the lead today. I want to hear what's on your mind. What intrigues you about the intersection of philosophy and pedagogy?
Well, to me, the two, I guess, you and I started talking about this. Well, we've talked about it a lot of different times, but we talked about it most recently when I was saying that, Plato and reading Plato was basically the reason that I went into teaching. I've been teaching now for 30 years. I started at the middle school level, taught at the high school level, taught at college and graduate school, and now I'm back at the middle school level, and I'm also academic dean. And I think that, there's just... when I was an undergraduate, I was a philosophy major and primarily was enamored of Plato. And I think that Plato, the lessons that I learned reading Plato back as an undergraduate are the way that I prepare every lesson that I teach, and they're always in my mind.
That's fantastic. So what I'm curious about, I have two questions. Is there a singular Platonic text that sort of gave you a schema for how to teach at all these different levels? And how does that, and if there is, I'd like to know what that schema is. And then how do you implement it? Like, how would you say you would implement it at the graduate level? How do you implement it at the high school level? How do you implement it, I don't know, with children? How does it all work? And if someone wanted to learn this approach, where should they look for it? Do they have to read all of Plato, or is it concentrated in 1, 2, or 3 texts?
So to me, I think, first of all, one of the things that's really important to me is that the form of the dialogue is key. It's not even primarily or exclusively the message of the dialogue, it's the form. And the dialogue form is what is really fascinating. So I was introduced to this idea, and most of what I did, this is going to answer the question, I promise, but it'll take a second.
Please, digress all over the place. I'm okay with that.
So the idea that I was introduced to when I was in college was that there is, that each dialogue works in a tripartite structure. And essentially what happens is that, Socrates meets somebody, a topic is raised, and then there's this reduction to aporia, where there are a series of questions where the interlocutor, the person who he's speaking to, reveals more and more about himself or herself, usually it's himself, until you get to a point where all of a sudden this person says, all right, I realize I don't know what I'm talking about.
And just for clarification, that's what the state of aporia is this utter state of confusion that Socrates was able to induce.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second part of the dialogue, at least the way that I learned it, is where philosophic truths are presented. And it's sort of the highest section of the dialogue. And then the third section of the dialogue is where Socrates goes back to re-questioning the interlocutor, finds out that the interlocutor usually is not there, has not really understood this, and offers a kind of philosophic help. Mm. So there are a couple so I'll get to how this applies to teaching in a minute, but the thing that I was really interested in is, I think that everybody who reads Plato has the experience of saying, well, this interlocutor is asking the wrong question, or Socrates gives this kind of nonsense answer, and that's the wrong answer, and he should have been pushed on that. And people get frustrated, and they put the book down at that point. But what I think that happens, and this is not my idea, it's an idea I was introduced, though I went through and traced it through a lot of dialogues, is to say, no. If you ask the questions that you want to ask, and you keep them in your mind, what you find is that in the middle section of the dialogue, Socrates addresses you, not the interlocutor, and you're able to understand what he's saying in a much deeper sense. But it's like you gain a gateway to it. Like you don't automatically have it. You only get there by thinking critically and independently on your own. And then by the time you get to the third section, philosophic help, you see it as sort of an allegory of the real truth that you were presented with in the middle section. So it's like, oh yeah, these are the shadows on the cave wall, that can help this person. But in fact, I understand how it has this much deeper resonance with the part that I got in the middle. Okay, so I said I promise I get back to your question. So a couple ways to get back. I'd say actually the Meno is one of the main dialogues, for this, because I mean all of the dialogues work this way is the theory, and so you can approach any dialogue. I mean, it'd be pretty intimidating to do with like Republic, right? Because it's so huge. But particularly with the smaller middle dialogues, like when you get into those and you really see how they work, they all kind of work the same way. The second thing that is so important to me, and actually this is one of the reasons why I think that Plato is so relevant to teaching and so relevant to today's world, is at least one way to look at the history involved here is that we went with Aristotle and we went with the lecture. We went with lecture notes and information and this whole idea of like, here is the information. Yeah. But in Plato, it's much more of things are important, like that the drama is important, the character is important, the setting's important. And so you're bringing in all of the learning that would normally be associated with like a play. You're actually picking up in a dialogue, and that's part of the message. That's part of the teaching that's going on. And so it really, I mean, essentially my suspicion is, and I can't say that I can totally prove this, but it was the evidence for it mounted every time I looked at a dialogue was that what Plato had done was that he had responded to Socrates' deep distrust of writing by producing a document that worked, like in modern terms, almost like a video game. Like it's like you had to unlock certain portals in order to get what the real message is. Right. The message is never on the surface. The message is only available to people who are ready to read the message and ready to get it. And part of, a lot of the basic ways that this affects me in teaching, which is what this conversation is theoretically about, is, first of all, almost all of my lesson plans are a series of questions. That's how I start off, is with questions, because to me, you always need to start with asking questions to figure out, what does someone know? What don't they know? What are they bringing to the table? And also there's this idea that, we have in school, and this is a problem in education, and it's become worse since the information explosion, which is we think what we need to do is provide people with information. Well, there are at least two steps that have to happen before that. In the first place, if you want someone to learn something, you first of all have to convince them that they don't already know it. Because a lot of times people think they already know it. They're like, why would I listen to this? Right. And the second thing is you have to convince them that they should care about it, that it is meaningful to them at all. And, if you don't know those things, like I used to do this seminar at Foxcroft where I would come in, and it was really fun. I did it for a few years before I taught there. I was invited in as a guest. And I would say, okay, we're going to take on, something like what is courage? We're going to do a Socratic dialogue. Wow. And so I'd come in and I'd say at the beginning, okay, look, I know we're going to be talking about courage today. I'm going to be telling you about Plato and courage. But, can we all agree that we all basically know what it means to be brave? And the girls would say, yeah. And I'd say, oh, thank God, I'm so happy. Well, yeah, because I was so worried about this, because when I went home and was trying to prepare, I found that I was confused. And then the more I looked at it, the more confused I got. And I just, so I came today feeling like I have nothing to say. But now I find that you guys have the information, and you can provide it to me. And they'd say something like, okay, yeah, well, courage is doing something you're afraid of. And I'd say, okay, that's great, because I know I'm really afraid of getting hit by a car, but I'm going to go run across I-66 as many times as I can to be courageous. And say, no, that's not it. That it's doing something you're afraid of for a good reason. And so, wait a minute, you're just putting it off now because for a good reason. I don't know what that means. And so now we just have another problem. And the thing is that we'd get to a point where, I'd role play this out, because this is obviously mirroring the dialogues, but I'd get to a point where they'd be like, well, okay, goddammit, you tell me what you think courage is. And when you're at that moment where even if they just want me to say something so that they can attack it, because I've been undermining them, now you're available for learning. Where if I just came in and said, okay, I'm going to tell you what Plato says about courage, who cares?
Do you think the aporia makes individuals curious to go further?
Absolutely.
So confusion is absolutely essential for interestedness.
Right. It can have the other effect too, because there's this moment where, because you could be like, I'm confused, this is painful, I don't want to do this. I remember...
Well, lots of people did that to Plato as well, right? There were a lot of people who were just like, I have things to do, I'm gone, I don't have time for these trivialities. And a lot of people would caricature Socrates, like Aristophanes in the clouds. We had him sort of just be like, this guy is just nonsense. He's just floating on this thing, right? So
and that happened. Sometimes at Foxtrot, every once in a while, people would say something like, "Man, I just want to kill you when you talk like this." Like, that's the impulse. But I had another similar moment in my seventh grade class. I think it was last year, where we were talking about something, and then someone said, "Wait," I don't even remember what it was, but one of the kids said, "Wait, Mr. Lyman, this thing we're talking about, there's not an answer to this question, is there?" And I said, "No, there isn't." And they said, "Why are we talking about it if there's no answer?" And my very natural response was, "Why would you want to talk about anything else?"
Yeah.
I mean, if there's an answer, I'll just tell you the answer. In fact, I have a rule in class that, like, I think a lot of times teachers play what I call the mind reading game, which is like, I have an answer in my head and I'm waiting for you to say it. Now, that's fine if you're asking a question like a mathematical question or a question of factual recall. But if I ask something like, why do you think that Anne Alexander in To Kill a Mockingbird, is critical of her brother? Like, if people say something and it's legitimate, but I'm going like, okay, and what else, and they know, hey man, he's just waiting for me to say something he's already got in his head. They can call me on that. They can say, you're playing the mind reading game. Just tell me what you're thinking, and I'll tell them. Because that's, I think, is sort of a dirty trick to play on kids.
I do that a lot. Well, I don't know if I do. I don't know if it's a dirty trick or if it's bad or whatever. But I notice when I'm trying to create my seminars and things like that I oftentimes will lead a lot of the interlocutors I have because there's a particular thing I want to go to. But then, I'm fortunate to have such gifted interlocutors that they come around and they question that distilled answer. Because, I mean, as you well know, there's no concrete philosophical answer that is going to be totally impenetrable to philosophical scrutiny. Right.
I mean, I think that there are really different kinds of questions, and one of the things that I've done, I still work at the New Teacher Institute in the summers, and sometimes we do sessions on types of questions. Because there are different kinds of questions. There can be, factual questions, like here's the answer. There can be questions that are convergent questions, which is like, well, there are a number of correct answers that, could be the case. There are divergent questions where it's like, well, this is actually not designed to produce one answer. It's designed to produce lots of, territory to explore. There's Socratic questions, which are designed to be sort of, to gain more power the more you talk about them. Yeah. And I think they're all fair kinds of questions, but I don't think it's fair to ask a kid one question pretending it's one kind when it's really another.
Well, let me ask you this, all right? So we've noted that not everybody responds to Socratic aporia in the same way, right? There are going to be those individuals who are like, you know what? You've reduced me to confusion, but I like it because now you've given me something to live for, and you've taught me that the life of the mind is something that is kind of self-fulfilling. It may not lead to the ultimate answers, but I like it. Mm-hmm. I like the vivacity of my mental faculties being activated by this line of questioning and discussion, stuff like that. But do we not alienate large swaths of humanity by reducing them to that confusion? And is that a problem for philosophy? And I guess, or do they eventually come back around because we've planted that seed of doubt? I mean, what about the people that we turn off to philosophy through that mode of confusion?
So I think that one of the things that is so lovely, really, and sort of sensitive and beautiful about the dialogues is that the dramatic form of them, so many times, and I really tried to do this, like when I did the thing at Foxtrot, we would end up the class on courage by saying something like, well, maybe we really haven't gotten towards a definition of courage here. But I have to say, I feel like you guys have been courageous in your willingness to face your confusion and to move forward on this. Or if you're doing it on friendship, maybe we're having a hard time, pinning it down here, but it seems that somehow in this process we become better friends. So, there's this idea that
there is an intimacy an intellectual intimacy that evolves as a result of being vulnerable in that intellectual sphere.
Right. And it's like moral behavior is not just, following rules. It's being interested enough to ask the questions that leads to those rules. And so a lot of morality can be not so much just sort of inculcating these precepts and like living your life according to certain sorts of guidelines, but being engaged in a living question about what does it mean to behave the way that we should behave? What is the proper function of a human being? What is arete? Those sorts of questions, lead to the development of arete.
So I think a big part of it is, right, is like when you're engaging somebody who may be turned off by this line of questioning or something like that, is to kind of bring in some sort of human warmth to it where you're just, you're like, look, we're both on a journey together.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, I don't know either, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be searching for it.
Do you feel like you learned that from Socrates and Plato?
Absolutely.
Do you feel like, because the thing is with Socrates and stuff like that, a lot of his compliments, right, when he compliments his interlocutors, you don't know if he's being facetious. You don't know if he's being ironic. Like, oh, you're so much more knowledgeable than I am on this subject or this or that. Like it's kind of like, are you having one over on me?
Right.
But I guess I'm kind of curious. Is that something learned from Socrates, or is that something that Hunt Lyman developed? Because I think that's what you and I have in common as educators. I think that's why people gravitate towards us as teachers.
Right.
But I don't know if that is something that every philosopher picks up on from Plato or picks up from other philosophers. And I wonder if that's like a big part of what I'm trying to do at Noetic is to make philosophy accessible and relevant and trying to figure out where did we lose our way? Like, how did it become so alienating to the general public? And,
one of the ways that I would respond to that is by saying that, what I said at the beginning, I think we went with the lecture, and I
goes back to Aristotle,
I don't have a sense of, Aristotle as a person. I don't have a sense of, most of the people. I don't have a sense of Descartes as a person. Like, what was he like?
You didn't weep when Aristotle died.
But
because that's what I did when I read the 5 Dialogues.
Yeah.
I viscerally cried when Socrates died.
Yeah, I mean, I've had dreams about Socrates. I feel like I know him, and part of the reason is because I know him as a character. I mean, of course, there's this great irony that you don't know Plato, right, at all, because he's sort of the total, and you tend to use the terms interchangeably a lot of the time. Socrates.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions I had down the road here a little bit about what we can attribute to who.
Right, but I certainly feel like I feel like I know Socrates. Now, and that may be crazy. I mean, that may just be my own little mental problem that I've sort of developed this fantasy that I know who this person is. But my read on Socrates is that he is always, trying to help. You think about Symposium. You think about Alcibiades crashing in at the end of Symposium, and in an affectionate way, but sort of insulting Socrates. But you think about Plato writing this with everything that that Alcibiades did in betraying Athens, being sort of the worst example of what happens in democracy, that you're willing to sort of give this guy a chance again because he's so charming and compelling, even though he's selling out your country when it's but the portrait of Alcibiades, even though you get a sense of him as being an incomplete person and being someone who doesn't really have the right answers, it's still warm, it's still affectionate. And I mean, I think that's the other thing that, in my role, I deal with kids all the time. And I also deal with parents as an administrator. When I deal with kids, I'm almost never frustrated. And I am sometimes frustrated with parents. But with kids, I always feel like any time that I feel like they're off base, it's just, that's the opportunity for education. And I feel like that's the way that the dialogues are. That Socrates always looks at these people, as, well, there's just something, they don't have here. I mean, he's the guy who came up with this, all evil is ignorance. That's a really compelling, kind of philosophy.
Totally.
To think about that, if somebody's off base, it's not that we're going to go to war against them. It's, we're going to spend some more time talking with them and see if they move or if we do. But, as long as we engage together, we can build a community out of this.
Well, you've convinced me on this pedagogical method. All right. So the question then becomes to me is, how do you repurpose it when you're dealing with people who are in different life stages, developmental life stages, right? So, what's your experience applying this to college students, high school students, middle school students, even very small children? Because this is a theme, right? So this is something I think about a lot because, at least in this country, and there may be pockets of it here and there. Philosophy is not something that is part of the core curriculum in public schools. What, English and tech ed and other things those are seen as useful and essential for the liberal arts or even technical training or pragmatic education. But philosophy is not. Right. I don't know why. I don't know why the powers that be have orchestrated it in such a way. Maybe they believe you have to be a certain age to have the intellectual blossoming to get your mind around these philosophical ideas. I think that's kind of bunk. But also, I don't know how I feel about this idea of philosophy being prescriptive, even to kindergartners, because there's something I like about philosophy in the sense that it's you have to kind of find it on your own, right? It's kind of like, no, like part of the reason why people love the Velvet Underground so much is that they found like an old vinyl or like a mixtape or something like that, and then it became their favorite band, and then they started their own band. And philosophy is a lot like that. It's kept away from society. It's withheld, and therefore it makes it more fascinating and makes the people who find it all the more passionate about it. But let's just say it was to be instituted at every single level. Mm-hmm. How would your pedagogical method change when you talk to a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 22-year-old?
I think that there are a great number of the most important philosophic concepts that are not particularly limited by the age of a child. Now, obviously, I mean, the capacity to develop abstract thought is not something you can have very, very intelligent kids who are not really thinking abstractly. And so there's certain kinds of philosophical questions that are going to be, not inappropriate. But, in most ways, I think that a lot of the most sort of significant philosophical sort of states that I've been in were when I was about 10 years old, and it's just I've learned how to articulate them a little more. But I mean, when I was 4, I remember sitting at the top of my parents' staircase trying to contemplate if infinity of the infinity of the universe and God and mortality, and like the complexity of the thoughts are still the same ones that haunt me today. Right. Now I don't know if I could have conceived of eternality, that word, but I can give it to it now. The concepts were all there. I think the question that I'm kind of curious about is like, can you induce a child into that abstract thought, or is it kind of just implanted in us from the get-go, from some strange reason? I would imagine that you and I, at very young ages, had this sort of intellectual proclivity, and if you can induce it, how do you induce it? Does it change with a 5-year-old, or can you use this questioning method of bravery to induce the aporia to get them to be passionate about something in the life of the mind? Will that work on a child? Will that work on a 15-year-old? Sure. I mean, any time. I mean, here's the other thing about the dialogues that I think are so compelling, is that any teacher realizes that as soon as you are able to teach someone one-on-one, it's a totally different experience than even a very small class, even a class of 3 or 4. Right. Now, there are other educational possibilities that you can get into when you have a class of 16. You can do other things that will educate people, but when you can drill one-on-one down into figuring out, okay, what does this person understand? What doesn't this person understand? That is just a qualitatively different experience than teaching, a whole class of kids. I think that that's absolutely true. And so I think that anytime, you are with a person of virtually any age, as long as they can talk, you can ask questions that will help people discover what they think and help people discover how to think.
So you can see a 7-year-old intellectually blossom.
Absolutely.
From your empirical experience or whatever.
Yeah.
And even though they may not have, even though their brain is still developing at a rapid rate.
I mean, because you can always say, if you have a sense as to, okay, even if there's a tricky thing with Plato, is that there is always a little bit of this undercurrent of like, okay, does Socrates really know the truth? Is there just one truth? I mean, that's what the whole theory of forms is, right? Is that there is a single immutable truth. And there's a sense that I think a lot of people object to in Socrates, that, he has that. And so all of this feigning of ignorance is just sort of, screens and mirrors and things to try to convince people. And I don't know, I have some ambivalence about that, because I do think he's got a line on the truth, but I also think there's something really genuine and honest about the search he's engaged in. And I think that that's what I try to emulate when I'm working with a kid of any age, is you're sort of exploring, okay, what is going on in your mind? What are you thinking about? And what's the next step? And what you're trying to do is help someone take the next step.
Do you talk to him like you talk to me right now?
I don't talk.
Because when I tried to be a traditional educator, right? Yeah. So I would go on these interviews and things like that, and people would just be like, could you not talk like an alien so much? I don't think you sound like an alien, but there are people who may be listening to this, watching this, or whatever, that think that we're aliens and that think that we're not normal people.
I teach. I teach 7th grade and 8th grade right now, and I also teach a class of 4th grade. I play guitar with 2nd graders every week, and so I'm working with kids like of all these ages. I really talk exactly this way to everybody. Yeah. I don't change. I went in and read a story to kindergarten the other day, and I did change it a little bit there because I was reading a story about dinosaurs, and so I, sort of brought some drama to my voice. I think my voice was a little higher. I was thinking about that.
It's fine.
But most of the time,
I like a little drama.
Yeah. I don't think I talk to my students any differently. My fourth grade students, I don't talk to them any different. I talk to them in exactly this tone. And I don't. I think
they're never turned off or anything.
Maybe they are. I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
I don't think you would have gotten to the position that you're in if they were turned off.
I think I have a good relationship with my fourth graders, and I think that one thing that they like is that I don't talk down to them. And I have.
That's exactly what I think we ought to be doing, right? Is that everybody wants everything to be simpler. But I never really wanted to come down from the mountaintops. I was like, no, let me take you up to them.
Well, and also, there's, another, basic fact about teaching is that over and over again, people who go into the classroom have the experience of saying, you know what, I never really understood this until I started teaching it. That's the nature of teaching.
I love that. The fact that I'm going so hard on teaching right now, I actually feel like I'm firing on the greatest intellectual.
Absolutely. You can look at, there's a lot of research on this in terms of saying, you retain about 7% of what you learn in lectures, and you retain a lot more, like I think over 90% of what you teach somebody.
I totally believe that.
And so I sort of feel like, okay, if I want to, I kind of feel like one of the most important moments, for me in the dialogues, which I have a story about, but I don't know if I'll bother telling because it's a little self-indulgent. But it's about it's at the top of Diotima's ladder in Symposium, where Socrates tells the story of how he was introduced to the form of beauty, and to me, that's like an emotionally powerful moment. I feel like if the Spirit comes upon me, which it might, because this happens every once in a while, I should be able to explain that whole story to my fourth grade class, they should be able to get it. And I wouldn't feel any reluctance to do that. And I think that a lot of times, I do think that people look on me as almost sort of an interesting creature from the zoo this way, But again, it's like I think sometimes kids are really good at figuring out what game teachers are playing, and so sometimes if the game is anything that comes out of their mouth might be on the test, I think that can be very intimidating. And so I try to make it really clear, I'm just going to talk to you about this because I care about it and I think that you should know about it. But I understand I'm not putting this on a test, so don't worry about that. I have a couple things that I do every year where I read passages. I just did one this week from books that I know are going to make me break down in tears in class. And part of the reason I do that is because I want people to see this means something to me. I'm not just trying to teach you this so you can do well on the SATs. I'm teaching you this because this is, how human beings find meaning.
Oh my God, I had an experience like that on camera recently. With the last seminar installment I did for the Roland Barthes stuff, I thought it was it's a book on photography, which I found interesting. And it made me have a new appreciation for that art form and to see things in a different way. But I was doing it, and the ideas just kind of slowly crept up on me, and I really felt like I had this emotional epiphany in it. The only other time that I had something like that happen was with the 5 dialogues. And I thought that was interesting that there was this 17-year gap between reading that book and then talking about this one or whatever. I think it's incredibly important to have those moments of vulnerability built into it. Because like you said, then people start to understand the relevance of this stuff to their lives. I was a little self-conscious about it when I first put it on tape because the walls had come down and the reality of myself had been there. But precisely, maybe that's going to be precisely what people need to go further into this stuff.
Because this needs to be a human endeavor. And it needs to be, so, it's the same, these are some things that I think, absolutely come from my reading of Plato in terms of my philosophy of teaching. I think that everybody should laugh in every class. There should be a funny moment.
Totally.
There may be, it's possible you may be a class that's on a really depressing subject and no one laughs. But generally speaking,
there's a lot of absurdity in
to me, humor is a method of classroom control.
Totally.
Because if everybody's laughing together, you have a moment of community, and you have something that's good that's happening. I feel like I've had people cry in class. I've cried in class. I think that that's important too. We remember things emotionally. You know this from brain research that that you have to have an emotional involvement. Now, a lot of times the emotional involvement in a class has to do with the relationships among people in the class or the relationship, among the students and the teacher. Those have to be there. We're engaged in a human endeavor when we teach, and this is again, why to me the dialogues are more relevant now, because we live in an age where there's so much available, so much inert information available on the internet. And you can get all the information you want. I remember I had a cousin of mine, my Uncle Harry. One time we used to ride out to Thanksgiving in Long Island together, and he was talking in the early days of computers. Oh, we're just going to be able to give everybody a computer, and then if they don't learn it, it's their responsibility.
Yeah.
And
if you're willfully ignorant, it's on you.
Right.
There's no excuse anymore.
Well, but the excuse is that you only gain any beginning. The only way you gain entrance to that is by somebody who's willing to guide you there. Someone who's. I mean, people don't. I've got to have a good relationship with my students if I'm going to get them interested in English. It's not going to start with their relationship in English. It has to start with a human connection.
Right.
Unless they've had someone, that they've made that connection with before me and I'm just continuing it.
Well, I have to say, I'm very thankful for you having this conversation with me, because I think you're going to bring a lot of people into studying philosophy just by this podcast and this video alone.
Nice.
Yeah, and I hope it's been a good experience, because I'd like to do further installments with you, because this has been incredibly illustrative for me, hearing you talk about all these different subjects. Something maybe we're at the 30-minute mark, so maybe I would like for you to wax poetic about this question, as long as you would like, and this is the big one. Yeah. So I run for president. I win, and I appoint you the Secretary of Education. Mm-hmm. You get confirmed in all of that. How would you go about restructuring the curriculum for how we study things at every level? I mean, how would you fit philosophy in it? Would you make it prescriptive? And how would you do that? I mean, how do you shake out on the role of philosophy in secondary education in this country? So
I'll answer, as is my want, in by a little bit of misdirection at the beginning.
That's
because
fine.
I thought it was something that you were going to say. One thing I think that we need to do, particularly for younger kids, is we need to be in schools that are smaller so that we know who the kids are. Education needs to begin with people, with people knowing each other. They need to start with communities. We've got to get away from this factory metaphor, of school, that education takes place like the way we build products in factory. We formed an educational system in this country in response to huge waves of immigrants, and we did it according to a factory model of how to do something. And that's where a lot of the language and a lot of the terminology that we have comes from. And I think that has become increasingly irrelevant. And we really need to stop thinking of putting a priority on efficiency and tracks and grades and all of that stuff. And we need to start thinking again about how we build connections in meaningful communities. Those words, connections and communities, should be a lot more relevant. But I'm not actually sure the degree to which, I took a philosophy class in high school and I loved it and I was, ready to do that. But to me, philosophy can imbue, many of the traditional, disciplines as they're set up right now. So it's not even important to me that we say, well, we teach philosophy as something separate. I sort of feel like philosophy is, I'm an English teacher, but I feel like I teach philosophy all the time. So maybe it's not necessarily that we need to build specific philosophy courses, but maybe the courses shouldn't be so segmented to begin with. So maybe it should be interpenetrated. Right. So if you're taking a biology class, you read some of the philosophical musings of Spencer. Right. Or if you're doing an English class, maybe you bring in I don't know what you would bring in semiotics or something like that. If you start thinking about English, math, science, history, language. All of those subject areas should be imbued with philosophy. So maybe just tear down a lot of these false distinctions, and maybe also making sure that people who are going to go into teaching do have a background in philosophy. Yeah. And I think a lot of people do, because part of the reason is because as a philosophy major, once you end up graduating, you end up going into education. Right. I think it sort of is a natural dovetailing. But I think that we need to encourage people, to be bringing philosophers in and to seeing philosophers as integral to all of those disciplines. That's a really wonderful way of thinking about it. That going through the backdoor channels, I really enjoy that. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we were sort of at a natural conclusion point, but if there was anything else that you wanted to impart, no. And we'll think of some more topics, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime. All right. I appreciate it so much. Thank you. My pleasure, Luke. See you guys. Take care.